Hello, my name is Larry Rosnuk. I'm a Canadian painter, printmaker, sculptor. It's a pleasure to be back here at Hallwalls. I was a member of Hallwalls back in the 70s and exhibited then in a number of member shows like this one then, and then eventually economically and whatnot, beat up old car, I couldn't get back over the river. But here I am again, and initially I went to school and I studied at Queen's University in Kingston, and I have a degree in engineering geophysics. And while I was at school, I became friends mostly with artists and people in psychology. I started going to the art gallery there, auditing art courses and skipping classes and going with the art department to New York City. I always wanted to be a painter ever since grade school, actually. And it wasn't until after I graduated that I was able to finally start painting. Initially, my work was kind of engineered because of my background, and I'd work on drawings and do complicated pieces and small work in fine detail. And essentially, it took me years and years and years of mixing paint to figure out, to get a repertoire, like a musician, knowing the scales and whatnot. My ultimate goal was to become an impressionist painter. But initially I started off sort of primitive work, then a bit of surrealism, and eventually, working in Canada, it was impossible for me because everybody said, oh, you're not a painter, you're that engineer guy. So essentially I fled the country, I made a connection, and I moved to England, as many painters do, and I essentially went abroad and reinvented myself. And from then on, when they would say, who are you and what are you and what do you do, I would say, well, I'm a Canadian painter. Initially, it was the Impressionists that really turned me on. When I snuck off to New York City once with the art department, I went into the big room at the Museum of Modern Art where Monet had his large water lilies. And it was like a religious experience for me. It was, I still don't know how he painted them. I mean, they were gigantic. He had trenches up and down with serpents moving them around in his garden. And they just awed me. And essentially, I've been struggling to become free and loose like him. And I'm having not a lot of success because I'm an uptight engineer, I guess. But when I was in England, I was fortunate enough to meet a man who had just moved to Falmouth in Cornwall, where I was living. And he was the new head of the painting department. And because I was a bit older and whatnot, we became friends. And this man, Ray Atkins was his name, you can look him up online, does gigantic outdoor paintings, 10 by 12 feet paintings out in the countryside and working right there with palette knives and mixing paint and a lot of action painting and whatnot. And I was really uptight at the time and wanted to get some freedom like he had. And he said the only way I could watch him paint, because he was very secretive, was to model for him. So I sat for him. He did a big 6 by 4 foot painting of me, and I watched how he worked. I then took that with me to France, and I've been working with that little bit of knowledge ever since, having not been trained as an artist. And this painting here, it's called Battleship at Rest, the USS Edson in Port Colborne in 1982. Is essentially what my work looks like now. And what I'd like to do is just ask you to raise your hands quickly. How many people think this is a realist painting? Like from Rayon? No. How many of you think it's an expressionist painting? One person. 3, 4, 5, okay. How many people think it's a surreal painting? One person over here. Anyways, what I do now, I never work in a studio. I only work on site. All my work is done outside, on location. My favorite size is 4 feet by 6 feet. And because of painting all these years, I've been able to quickly mix colors. I mix them on my palette. I apply them directly to the canvas. I don't draw. I draw with the paint. And this particular painting, I knew that the Edson was coming into Port Colborne. So I loaded up my paint. Usually I buy it in quarts. I had no canvas handy at the time, so I slapped together a piece of pegboard. And I went off in my truck with my paint and parked in front of this boat. Started unloading my paintings, or my paint, setting up, and instantly this big light came on, big spotlight from the ship. There were two MPs standing on the bow of the ship the whole time that I was there, and this was way before the days of terrorism. Instantly, within a minute, the Niagara Regional Police showed up to find out what I'm doing, unloading things in front of a battleship. And the police, I had a small gallery in Port Colborne at the time, so the police knew who I was. Oh, it's just Larry, they radioed in. But they stayed there and watched me the entire time. This painting took between 3.5 and 4 hours to do. And during the night, and all my paintings have a story because they're all done on site. I attack classical themes, portraits, landscapes, urbanscapes, nude studies. I've done quite a few paintings at night. And I've traveled after France and England, Morocco, Germany, Holland. Everywhere I've gone, I've worked either in oil pastels or small oil paintings. But this particular painting, as I was working on it later on at night, sailors were coming from Port Colborne, either out drinking or taxi cabs pulling into the ship. Probably in those days they went to Niagara Falls. And this is where the red on the battleship came from. It's the braking lights of the cabs dropping off the people at the gangplank over here. This is just some of the freight cars of CP Rail that were parked on the track siding there, and this is the grain mills in Port Colborne. And as you work at night and focus on something, or on anything actually, things change. If I'm doing a sunset, for example, I've only got at the maximum 3 hours to do a large painting. And of course the shadows are changing, the clouds are coming and going. So I think this adds a surrealistic element to my work in that it's not expected. I went there to paint the boat, I didn't go there to paint this particular painting. But as I set up and did this, the more I'm looking at the light, your eyes get adjusted to the dark, and you start to see, red outlines around in the sky and blue and whatnot. So I add all these in, the reflection on the water, everything just sort of happens, and I try to capture it. And of course, it's a generalization of what I'm looking at, because time is moving, shadows are moving, colors are changing. So you make decisions as you're working. Sadly, I consider myself an old-fashioned artist. And I think I'm quite out of step with the present times, in that most people now want instant gratification. And you can certainly come to my studio and buy a piece of art, but I prefer to get to know the person, to go to your house or come to my studio, you sit and put in some time and energy, we get to know each other, and I'll do a portrait of you or your family. I attack, as I said, classical themes. One of my favorite is mother and child. I've got quite a selection of those, mostly with my own family and my ex-wife. So anyways, I think, although I'm an impressionist, I think there's expressionism in there. I work a lot with palette knives. This has both brushwork and palette. I really think the pegboard added a lot to the feeling of the battleship and the metallicness of the boat. So, any questions? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.